Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Andy Lynn James. I am the coordinator of the Special Needs and Inclusion Program here at the Trenton MFRC. We are joined today by Mary Ellen Thompson, a local speech and language pathologist. She's going to talk to us tonight about toddler and preschool speech development, tips, tricks, red flags, that sort of thing. She's going to give us a lovely presentation. We're going to follow that up with a Q&A. So if you have any questions or any comments at all throughout the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat. We're also live streaming on Facebook. So if you're watching from Facebook, you can drop your questions in the comments and we will make sure that she gets them at the end. If you would prefer to keep them private, feel free to email myself or direct message through Facebook. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you, Mary Ellen. I know you have lots to say, so we'll get right down to it.
Okay, thanks. So hi everyone, and I'll try to make this as succinct as possible, and please feel free to have any questions. There's no bad question. The only bad question is the one you don't ask. So don't be afraid to ask questions. So I'm going to talk about language development in toddlers and preschoolers and looking at what we expect for a normal child to develop. So I guess when the biggest question that I get in the clinic and the thing that brings people in is the question of, is my child talking like every other child? And people unfortunately compare all the time. So that usually is what people look at, but we're not all the same. So you have to understand that there is a range, but what I'm talking about tonight is kind of the normal, within the normal range. This is our expectations. And then I will talk about the red flags and things you should be concerned about. So speech pathologists have a very wide scope of practice, and it includes all of the things that are on this slide. What we're really going to focus on tonight is speaking and listening, a little bit about early literacy, and a little bit about swallowing problems that can occur in young children. So the big thing that for me is that really language development in children is basically a miracle, because young children go from this little thing that basically barely moves, it's just a tiny, tiny child, and within like 2.5 years, you have this wonderful, talking, engaged little person who is a competent speaker. And so that's a pretty big miracle. And then when we look at what's happening in our brain and what's happening in terms of neural connections, so those are all the fibers in our brain that we're laying down. And this slide really shows like these connections start prior to birth. And the red line is language. And most of the language connections are actually, and those neural connections are laid down in the first year of life. And you see that how the higher cognitive functions later on. It's important to realize that in the first 3 years of life, children are making 700 neural connections a second. So your brain is like the ultimate 4-lane or multi-lane highway. And this is really important because this is a heightened opportunity for growth, and a lot of change happens in this time. So we want to take advantage of it. And what do healthy communicating children look like? They play, they get along with others, they talk, they listen, they ask questions, they solve problems, they make decisions, often not the decision we want, but they make decisions. They, create, build, explore. They're interested in symbols. They're interested in text. They can tell you where McDonald's is. They recognize that symbol very early. They gradually become comfortable with new places. And as they attend school, they demonstrate self-help and self-regulation skills. So they learn so much in such a short period of time. So as speech pathologists, we always talk about receptive and expressive language. And sometimes that distinction is difficult. Receptive language is what you hear and what you understand, and expressive language is what you say. The important thing is people will often say to me, well, he understands everything or she understands everything, but she's not saying anything. And for us, that means that the child is at risk, because the way that you build expressive language and the way you build receptive language is you ask questions, you get information, then you store that information. So there's a balance between the two. So you don't like to see them out of sync. So now I'm gonna quickly go through birth to a year-olds before we sort of get to the toddlers, because it is important, and I think you can't underestimate how much growth is happening. So what do you expect your newborn to look like? You expect them to notice you and turn to your voice. You expect gurgling noises, you expect cries, and by 2 months, you're hoping that they smile. And by 3 or 4 months, they're cooing, they bat at a toy, they turn to a voice. They will look at you intently, so they're maintaining attention. They smile and they laugh when you make silly noises. They love you to make raspberries on their tummy. And they like toys that make noise. So they're attracted to all those things. And by 5 or 6 months, usually people will say that they make different sounds and they are expressing different opinions, like I'm happy, I'm not happy. They look at an object and they look back at you. They can change their expression based on your voice. So they're very sensitive to sound. They will reach for a toy. And sometimes they start to imitate sounds. So we have this being that's really growing. So what are the 6-month red flags? There's not a lot, but if they stop babbling or they're not responding to sounds, those are red flags, which means it's time to do something. How can you help that 6-month-old continue to develop? Well, at 6 months, they love to look at your face. They love to look at in the mirror. They love books, which are pictures of faces. They love to play patty cake and games like that. They love peekaboo, like with just a blanket. You don't need a lot of things to play with a 6-month-old, but you need yourself to be really engaged, because that's what they really like. So then moving on to 7 months, you know, they're making way more noises. They're looking between parents if you're talking. They smile and they laugh when they're happy. And they're starting like that real babbling that is not just a few sounds, but it's like ba, 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 ma, 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 ma. And they can go for hours like that. So they're becoming very expressive and you can hear their tone changing. By 9 and 10 months, we expect them to use gestures. So, and we expect that as parents, you will start to know what they like, what they don't like. They listen to your voice all the time, and you can tell if they're happy or sad. So they've developed a lot. And by a year old, they're using gestures to point at things. They're babbling as if they're talking. So their babbling may sound like blah, 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 blah. Like, and it sounds like a sentence. It's just that they're speaking a foreign language. So they're really adding intonation patterns. They will take turns with you. They will play games where it's their turn and your turn. In peekaboo, they'll often play with a ball. They will maintain that interaction. They often understand the meaning of no, don't necessarily like no, but they know. And words start to emerge. They may have a word for mama or dada. It may not sound exactly like you want it to sound, but if it's used consistently to label that item or, you know, a pet, then that is considered a word that has emerged. And what are the red flags? The red flags doesn't babble with change in tone. So you don't hear anything that sounds like an intonation pattern of speech. They don't gesture. They don't wave bye-bye. They don't shake their head for no. They don't extend their arms to go up. They don't respond to their name. If they look like they need help and they don't respond, they don't like cry for help or make some noise of distress, They don't look at you or look at objects. And finally, if they have a history of ear infections, and that can be important because that can indicate very early problems with hearing. So if they're not hearing sound, they're not going to develop these things. So what do we do to play with kids at a year old to help them? Well, first of all, I think it's important that we use real adult-like language. And if we're going to label things, use the real word for it, but don't overwhelm them with language. Use gestures. They love to play patty cake. They love to build with towers, on top, on top, on top, and then hit it all in it. Oh, it falls down. You can say up, down, oh no, and they love oh no. And they love simple books where there's simple actions, 1 or 2 things on a page, and the frog hops, and the next page the frog eats a bug, whatever. So those are the kinds of things they like. So now as we go to 13 and 14 months, they use even more gestures. They'll clap to music, they'll blow kisses, and they start to imitate all your gestures. They communicate their preferences and choices very well at this point, and they start to use early words. And then by 15 or 16 months, we're getting more words. We'll get pretend actions, like they will pound the hammer, like if they're copying mom or dad hammering. They'll pretend to cook. They love dishes. They will often respond to your requests. Sometimes they don't always want to do those things, so you may not get a response. And they can maintain attention to a task. So you can do something with them for a few minutes, not forever, but for a few minutes. The red flags, if they don't respond to words like no or up, they say no words at all. They don't point to objects or pictures. Like if you're reading a book, we would expect that if they don't want something or they're interested in an object or a picture, they point to it. If they want some food, they point to what they want, or they go to the cupboard. So they're not sort of indicating to you, that's something I'm interested in, that's something I want. So those are kind of red flags. By 15 months, we're hoping that they're starting to have some ideas about pretend play, like they can feed their teddy bear or feed their doll, and they can have a big doll and they can have a baby doll. They can play things like head and shoulders. So they're starting to understand body parts. Bath time is a great time to review body parts and play those kinds of games. And they love books that repeat ideas. So Brown Bear or Hungry Caterpillar, like you're feeding the caterpillar all kinds of different things. So, and they love that repetition. And sometimes for adults, the repetition is boring, but they're learning so much through that repetition. So that repetition is critical for them. So by 18 months, we're hopeful that they have 20 different words that they use consistently. They don't have to be all words that everyone understands, but you as their caregiver understands. And they use gestures to help you understand. They will shift attention, and we have something called joint attention. So they will attend with you. And they can understand many of your directions without words. And at this point, I'm going to show you some graphs so you can see how your vocabulary builds, because it is just phenomenal how vocabulary builds. So this is receptive vocabulary. This is what they understand. So at 12 months, they understand the meaning of about 50 words. And by 18 months, they understand the meaning of 200 words. So that's a huge growth in what they understand. What are they saying? So at 12 months, we said maybe 2 words. And at 18 months, 50 words. So that's why we're saying 20, at least 20, because we're like looking at a range. But look at how this grows. Then by 24 months, we have 200 to 300 words. And by 3 years, we have over 1,000 words usually. So that's how much vocabulary they have, how many words they're using. And so this graph just puts it into perspective. So this blue line is what they understand, and this is what they're saying. So when they understand 200 words, they're only saying 50 words, right? So this is an important distinction to say, oh, what do they understand and what are they saying? And your goal is to continue to help them build vocabulary. And the one thing about vocabulary, you know, we sort of think about it as nouns, but we also want them to build those concepts like big, small, fast, slow, clean, dirty. We want them to build verbs like jump, hop, skip, run, drive, stop, start. So there's all kinds of vocabulary that they have to build. So at 18 months, the red flags, you know, if you say don't touch, like for the stove or a fire, and they don't understand that command, that would be a red flag. You want them to have at least 20 words, that you want them to be able to point to at least 3 major body parts. You want to be able to say them, where's your shoes, or where's your hat? Let's put on your boots. You want them to respond to those simple one-step commands. We're not going to give them 5 things to do, but 1 thing. And if they just have no interest in anything you're doing or anyone around them, then that's also a red flag. So what's important at 18 months? I think one of the most important things is to pause. Wait. Sometimes it takes them 2, 5, 10 seconds to figure out what they want to say. So we can often be impatient. So it's important to just step back and take a deep breath and let them see what will happen. I have this picture of a playground because playgrounds are amazing for all of those verbs like run, jump, hop, skip, swing, sit, slide, etc. Playgrounds are also amazing for positional prepositions. So in, out, up, down, through, beside, under, over. So you can use play structures to reinforce all of those ideas. And I put this ball, these kids playing the ball here because they're taking turns. That's important. They're also starting to use mine and yours, like my turn, your turn, it's my ball, etc. And those are important things. You can also talk about whether you're rolling the ball, whether you're throwing the ball, whether you're catching the ball. So there's so much vocabulary that can just happen with one ball in a simple game. I put these little Paw Patrol guys and these boats here because we're trying to get kids at this point to start to recognize early categorization. So let's put the guy with the yellow hat and the yellow boat. Let's put the guy with the blue hat and the blue boat. You can do this a number of ways, and then you drive the boat floats. So you're adding all this vocabulary, and plus you're teaching early categorization. So 18 months is really an explosion of language, and it's really where they become really expressive. And as they develop, by 19 to 20 months, they're actually using language to share information and protest, which is kind of okay because we all protest. It's not always fun as a parent, but it does show that they're using language. We want them to name animals and people and body parts, objects, actions, places. We want them to start to do pretend play, and we want them to be willing to share with others. And that's hard because they're playing side by side, but the whole idea of mine and yours is starting to evolve. So by 21 to 22 months, obviously they have to learn new words every week if we're going to make those benchmarks that we've talked about in vocabulary. And at this point, kids start to put two words together. So it could be big ball, red ball. It could be my turn. It could be my banana. It could be mommy lunch, mommy go, etc. And you have to make sure if we're going to count it as two words, we have to hear those two words used in different contexts. So for example, if they say, what's that constantly, if you never hear what and you never hear that in any other context except what's that, then we count that as one word, even though I understand there are two words there, but they're only using it as a single unit. At this point, they'll often want you to play, want you to play dinosaurs, want you to play tea party, and they're starting to talk about what they're doing in their play. So they're sharing those ideas. And by 24 months, we want them to have at least 100 words. We want them to be using two-word combinations. We want them to be able to sequence information, follow two-step commands. So go upstairs and find your shoes. They're starting to use mine and you and me. They may read stories to stuffed animals or dolls, and you understand them over 50% of the time. Excuse me. So, what are the red flags at 24 months? Well, if we have less than 100 words, if we're not consistently putting two words together, if we're not waving by, imitating any of those actions, we're not doing pretend play, we're not feeding the baby, we're not making the man drive the car, we're not making the monkey sit in the tree or the horse jump over the fence. If they're frustrated, if it's difficult to understand their speech, and if they continue to drool at this age, other than when they're teething, then those things are considered red flags. And how do we play with these kids? Well, we know pretend play and dress up is important. So that can lead to all kinds of scenarios. We know that they love to play with figures like farm animals, take the horse for a ride, etc., right? We also know that books can become more complex. We can have books that categorize things, all the things on a farm, all the things at the fire station, etc. Kids are also able to talk about feelings, simple feelings like happy, sad. They can talk about hurt. And they're starting to do a lot more pretend play. And they will engage you in the pretend play, and they will give you parts. So you can be the elephant or whatever part they decide that you should play. So by 2.5, we've now got 350 words. We're reliably using two-syllable words. So many two-syllable words start earlier, especially animals, but we're reliably using two-syllable words. So instead of saying she play, we're saying she playing, etc. We've got lots of basic concepts emerging. We're using action words. Those action words are important because if we want to make sentences, we need to have nouns and action words. They will engage with other kids and take turns. They'll be sad if you're sad, or sad if their friends are sad. They're recognizing all these familiar places in town that they want to go to. They know that a red light means stop. They know the sign for McDonald's. And I'm not really an advertisement for that, but that's one that they tend to know. They may recognize grandma's house, the street where someone lives. They remember stories. They can retell stories. And they're starting to use question words: who, what, where. and Y as well, which Y can be a word that, can eventually be difficult because everything is Y, and sometimes there's not an answer or we don't have a long enough time to answer it. What are the red flags? Well, at 2.5, if we don't have 300 words, we don't have any action words, and we're not adding grammar, adult grammar. So simple plurals like 2 balls, baby sleeping in English would be that present tense is important, and also simple plurs. Kids that stutter for more than 3 months, they're now at risk of disfluency. Nobody understands them. So if you have a 2.5-year-old where no one understands them or the daycare doesn't understand them, that's a red flag. And if they're still at the single word stage. So lots of fun things to do with 2.5-year-olds. So the laundry room is a great place because there's clean and dirty, there's folding, there's a sequence, of how you do the task. And those sequences are important for them to learn. First this, then something else. These kids love dress up, and not just dressing up now, but actually playing the part. So like talking like the pirate, squeaking like the mouse, etc. They love things like playing with Play-Doh and making up stories and making figures and embellishing the story. They also love baking, and there's a wonderful amount of things you can do with baking, like stirring, like adding. It's hot, it's gonna be sprinkles, etc. So there's all kinds of things that you can do with baking. So I'm going to show you some charts now. So when we talk about intelligibility of speech, intelligibility for a speech pathologist means how much of what you say do I understand? So for these kids that are 2, somewhere between 20 and 50%. So we're not expecting to understand every word. And usually these kids are concrete. They're talking about what's in front of them. So therefore, it's easier for us to understand, because if we had heard this word without them holding the toy elephant or the giraffe, we might not have known what it was. But when they're looking at the toy, holding the toy, we know. So by 2 to 3 years, we're hopefully somewhere between 50 and 75% of what they say we understand. And by 4 and 5, by the time they go to school, somewhere between 75 and 90%, especially at 5, like it's 90 to 100%. We want to be able to understand them. And if people can't understand them, it's a speech sound disorder, but it's also going to affect their language development because they get frustrated. They can't ask questions. People don't respond to them appropriately because they don't understand the question. So they don't always answer the way with an answer that makes sense. So it is important to monitor this. And since there's so much language learning happening at this time, if there are problems with speech sound development, it is important to address it. And this really shows you the speech sounds. So these are the speech sounds in English. The order is similar across languages in terms of the place where we make the sounds and the way we make the sounds. It just differs slightly in terms of the sound structure of the language. So you can see between 2 and 3 is when they get most of the sounds. There are some more difficult sounds that we expect by 4, and then 5 and 6. And one of the problems if you go to school, if you're in grade 1 and these sounds aren't well developed, it's really hard to write a story and have it make sense, even though you're just learning to write sounds, when you're saying the child's saying the sound incorrectly and therefore writing the wrong sound down for whatever word. So it is important to consider speech sound development. So now we have a 3-year-old with 1,000 words. They're telling stories, they sing nursery rhymes. Sometimes they can remember the words better than we can. They'll do finger plays. Their sentences are often 5 words long. You'll often hear them talking to themselves, especially as they go to sleep, when they're making up stories or have make-believe characters or special friends. They're socially appropriate now. They're saying please, thank you, hello, goodbye. They know their body parts. They enjoy playing games. They will read stories that have a beginning, middle, and end. They can often recite all of the story to you. They'll make up, and if you change the story, they'll know. So they're well aware of what's going on. These are the sounds that they have, but they're also on the other chart. So I put the red flags for 3 and 4 years together. Because at 3, if they don't ask any questions, like there's no what, where, when, why questions, that's a big concern. If they're not using sentences at this age, so if you're still in like 2-word phrases, that's a concern. If they can't retell a story, like you went to grandma's birthday party and they can't sort of tell you what happened at grandma's birthday party, you don't understand what they say most of the time. If you ask a question like, where did you go? And they respond, where did you go? That's a problem because they're just modeling you. They're not really understanding the language. So what are strategies that support language development? This is a picture book that has things labeled, but there's no story in this book. And this is kind of one of the strategies we use, like get kids to talk about pictures, get them to make up a story, have the story be sequenced. So they're telling you a story. And for you as parents, instead of saying, is the baby swinging, which is a yes, no question. And for us as speech pathologists, you know, yes, no questions don't build your language because you just become a yes, no answerer. But I don't have an answer. Oh dear, Siri, that was Siri talking. Hope you didn't hear that. So instead of saying, is the baby swinging? It's like, what's the baby doing? What did the dad do? What's grandma doing? Where are they? Why did they go to the park? What do you think will happen next? Those kinds of questions, because they will stimulate all kinds of language development. Kids this age love adventure stories and fairy tales. They like taking turns with other kids and learning activities where they can cooperate and work together. So those are the things that we try to encourage. At this age is when children start to really engage in game playing. There's some really simple games that 3 and 4-year-olds start to enjoy playing. Playing games like allows you to take turns, work together, and there's always an outcome. So learning to accept the outcome. Many children start sort of organized sports, not in a competitive way, but in terms of skills and building skills and learning that you score a goal and there's a goal to whatever game you're playing. For if you're playing hockey, the goal is to put the puck in the net. So not to compete to put the puck in the net, but to learn that this is the goal and this is what we're going to do. And between 3 and 4, kids start to learn all these pronouns. And so they first learn I and me and my, mine and you, and gradually we get he and she and his and her. And these pronouns can be problematic. So sometimes we will get the me do it, or hers going, or him's lost his dog, things like that. So those are the pronoun errors that we often hear. If that's the only error you're hearing, you know, it's important for you to repeat back the correct pronoun so that they're hearing the correct form. And then we have this thing called morphology. So that's the sound structures of the language that change things that are meaningful in terms of the grammar. So in English, when we add S, that means we have a plural or it's a possessive, right? So the first sort of morpheme addition that we get is ing, so walking and sitting and running. And you'll hear kids say he running, he singing, etc. And then we get regular plurals, and then we get past tense. So we're adding ed in English. But what happens in English, because English is irregular and we have these crazy words like eat goes to ate, run goes to ran, they'll just take the regular form and add it. So he eated his lunch. I run to the park. Those things are normal at a certain age, and then they sort it out. The irregular past tenses, they come sort of like at the 4-year-old age, and then we get like the irregular plurals evolving in the early like SK age group. So if you're going to say a mouse and mice, if you're going to say a goose and geese, those things happen there. So the later language development in the early JK, SK ages are all these grammatical forms that are meaningful. So lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about literacy. Literacy has become really, it's always been important, but has become more of a focus, I would say, at this point. So reading books is important. You can read books on a tablet. Because of this wonderful pandemic, we've all had to move to more tablet-based materials in the clinic. But there's a place for books. So what are we expecting in terms of books? Well, in the first year of life, we're just expecting that you'll chew the book, hold the book, pat the book. We focus on bright pictures, one on a page. We want you to share it with an adult, and it's kind of a bedtime routine. It's basic, simple. By 2, you're starting to recognize which books you like. You recognize them by the cover. You know the stories. You are able to tell the stories. You'll turn the pages. We're not expecting you to sit for a long time, but by 2, we expect you to be able to tend to a book for at least 2 minutes. And we think that you're going to be able to label in pictures independently and point to pictures and sort of know the story. And then by 3, kids will listen to stories for a longer period of time. They start to hold the book correctly, and they start to recognize logos. They also start to understand that you can add to the story, and you can talk about what's going to happen next, and oh, why do you think that happens? So that you can really explore literature and the language. And by 4, that's kind of their first real introduction to print. They often know the first letter in their name. They understand that all that print carries a message. They can talk about characters in the book. They know their favorites. They know their favorite stories on television or in videos. And they'll like to read stories either to themselves, to other people, to you, to their stuffed animals. And there's protest if you try to change the stories. This slide talks about predictors of early literacy. Really what I want to say here as I don't want you to have to learn what all these things are. But what I want to say is all those nursery rhymes like wheels on the bus and 5 monkeys jumping on the bed and all of those things are really predictors of literacy. Children, when they do those stories and sing those songs, they're listening to sound. And in order to learn to read, you have to be able to listen to sound. You have to be able to listen to sound changes. And a lot of the early songs are based on rhyme. And rhyme is one of the earliest predictors of literacy. So it is important to encourage those songs, and they do play a very valuable role. So now we've been talking about red flags, and so that would mean that I must think that early intervention is important. And for me, I think early intervention is critical. And I think we just have to go back to that very early slide where I showed you those 700 neural connections that are happening every second in the first 3 years of life. And we know that in those first 3 years of life, the brain is very adaptable. So we want to take advantage of that, and we want to make any changes that we can. We know that early treatment improves the developmental path. Sorry. We know that providing families with resources and supports reduces frustration and reduces family breakdown. It promotes success at school. And it also improves behavior and relationships. So that's really important. This next slide has a ton of information, and I'm sorry, but I've included it. It was developed in Australia, and it shows you the red flags across all these ages in several different areas. And I just think it's a really valuable resource. I believe that these slides will be shared with you. So I think that this is a valuable resource for you. Lastly, I just want to briefly mention feeding and swallowing and say that we know there are links between children who have early difficulties with feeding and swallowing and sometimes speech sound production, which then can also lead to difficulties with language development. So I just want to pull that together, that say that there is a relationship there, and speech pathologists do look at everything to do with oral motor, and that would include feeding and swallowing. In terms of resources that you're going to be able to access from this webinar, we've developed these resources, and these are just pictures of them because I'm pretty sure that they're going to be distributed to everybody. So they look at what children are supposed to do at under 12 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and 5 years. And it tells you sort of ideas of what your child should do, ideas of how to talk to kids, because that changes, ideas of what to play, ideas of what to sing, and activities that you can enjoy with your kids. The other thing that we kind of did, we took a couple of activities and we talked about how you can use them across the age range. So one was playing with Play-Doh. So there's going to be a handout. It talks about how to play with Play-Doh and the things that you should stress at different ages. And then we also developed a handout about playing with a box, because it seems like we're in a box world because we all get many boxes delivered to our homes. And we talked about what you can do with a box. A box is an amazing thing. You can hide in a box, so you can go in and out. You can hide stuff in a box. You can guess what's in the box. You can put your hand in and feel what's in the box. Then you can create castles and other things out of the box. As kids get older, you can turn your box into a puppet theater. So boxes have enormous benefit and enormous use in language development, and it's such a readily available resource that we have at our fingertips these days, since we seem to be ordering so much online. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about tonight. This is just my contact information. I'm going to stop the share now and open it up for questions from you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marilyn. Ellen. That was a lot of information, but a lot of very useful information. And I'm sure everyone got what they needed out of that. But we do have a few questions. The first one I have here, their oldest will be 3 in April. They did get tested for autism, but did not meet the requirements. However, they are nonverbal. They show some interest in speaking, but they stagger on certain things. What can you recommend for them?
Did you say they stagger on certain things?
That's what it says, yes.
Okay. It sounds like they're in the process of some sort of testing and support. I mean, I think speech and language therapy, like with your child, is important, and just sort of learn some activities. One interesting idea that we've developed recently in the clinic is this idea of putting a preferred item in a clear box so they can see it, but they need you to help them open it. So just in order to get them to look at you and then look at the box, etc., to get interest, because you want to develop things where they're interested in communicating with you. So that's one way to do it. Bubbles is another amazing thing, because you can get children to request bubbles and play that, because there's an immediate reaction. Cause and effect toys can often be a great activity with kids like that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Do you have any tips for early speech development for an infant that has significant developmental delays and chromosome deletion?
I think you have to target a few words that are going to be primary and focus on those. So we tend to be often overwhelm kids. Make sure that we often say that, it's 1 + 1. So mama come, mama's here, because we'll use 5 or 6 words. They're not getting all of those words. So try to reduce your language and try to pick out a few significant words that you're going to repeat consistently.
Okay. And we've had more than one on this topic. As you know, military community and just this town in general, many bilingual families. We have a few that they are exposed to both languages, whether that's at home, at daycare, or in both environments. And they're wondering if it's normal for their child to take longer to speak in that instance, and when should they be concerned, and is there any downsides to being bilingual?
Well, I don't think there's really any downsides to being bilingual. We know that bilingualism makes you better cognitive thinker and processor, because you're able to look at things from different perspectives. So we've known that for a long time. Traditionally, people were like, oh no, children can't sort this out, it's too confusing. The more recent evidence seems to suggest that you need to make sure that the child understands what environments the language is used in. So if daycare is French, and that's fine, daycare is French, and home is English, or home is English, and grandma's house is French, or whatever. Don't try to introduce multiple languages in one environment. That's when it becomes confusing. I know that sometimes partners want like one to be the French speaker and one to be the English speaker. And I think after the child has developed language, that's fine. But in the developmental phase, it's important to make sure they understand what environment is what language. And there may be, given that they're learning two languages, if you're counting words, you have to count words in English and French and add them together. So 20 words would be, you know, they have this many words in French, they have this many words in English, together it makes that many words. So we know that they're accumulating vocabulary. There may be some slower things. There's going to be overgeneralization, and there's going to be some cross-language things that happen that they will eventually sort out, because we know that if you just introduce English, they will overgeneralize rules in English to irregular words. So they will overgeneralize rules that they learn in French to English and vice versa, but it will sort itself out.
Okay. Hang on, we just got a couple more questions at once. What is a good way to get the child to use the proper pronoun instead of their name?
And that's a hard one, because pronouns are hard, because when I say I, I'm talking about me, but they have to say I and talk about them. So I think what you do is when they use it, you respond back with the pronoun, and hopefully that it will evolve. Some kids just naturally do that for a while, and we eventually see them evolve. Sometimes they need some help along the way, but you just have to keep reinforcing what pronoun is that you want them to use.
Makes sense. We have an 18-month-old, and she only says mama and dada. Her comprehension is there. She can follow instructions for minor tasks. Not much interest in babbling, but rather just grunts when she wants to get our attention. Any specific strategies, and should we be looking into booking an assessment?
Well, I think you should book an assessment, just because we're one of those red flags. And I think we as parents are always we're super people. We can anticipate every need that our child has and respond to it. And so you have to sort of sit back and say, okay, I am not going to anticipate your every move and give you everything. I'm going to try to engineer the environment so you have to ask me. And I'm going to give you choice and make you make a decision, so that your child starts to understand that their communication is critical and it gets them what they need. Parents are just too good at their job sometimes, and kids don't have to communicate. And why would you bother if someone is able to serve you at all times?
Very true. My son is 23 months old, uses less than 100 words, but shows no other red flags, and he's quite able to communicate through sounds and gestures. He's been increasing his words in the last month. Should I be concerned, or should I just give him a little bit more time?
I think if you have 100 words at 23 months, I think you wait till 24 months. And my questions are, is he putting two words together? And are you kind of like that whole engineering the environment, try to engineer it so he's not just getting what he wants all the time and he has to ask for things? That's a hard call. I would carefully monitor it, just because we want to make sure if there's just a little push, we can give it to him.
Okay. Now, as you know, we're still kind of in the world of masking in daycare and in schools. Is there anything you can suggest? A lot of kids, they rely on the mouth movements, and we had some daycare workers asking, what can we do, or we just kind of have to live with it until until it's over?
Well, it is a concern. We have there are masks that the Hearing Society has with the clear window, so we have been using those in the clinics to some extent. And the problem remains that they're not N95s, and now we're in this other world. So it is difficult. And we know that this pandemic has definitely delayed child language development. There is no question. I've seen more 2-year-olds who don't talk in the last 2 years than I've seen in my entire career. So
For sure.
It is a factor, but I don't think there's an easy solution. They're seeing their parents at home, so that's what you have to do. And we don't really have a choice right now.
Just roll with the punches, I guess.
Mhm.
Oh, we just had another one come in. I have twins, a boy and a girl. They're almost 4 years old. My daughter's language is quite advanced for her age. However, my son seems to have some difficulty pronouncing L sounds and sometimes misses syllables. Should I be worried, or am I just subconsciously comparing him to his sister?
Well, L is one of those sounds that we expect at that age. And the part about missing syllables, so I'm assuming that means instead of saying basketball, sometimes they say basketball or whatever. Elephant becomes elephant. And helicopter is another good one that goes to that you delete a syllable. So those things are important. The L is important, and often, like, I wouldn't say it's an easy fix, but it's a speech sound that often we can fix fairly quickly. And the counting syllables is important because that's a predictor of literacy. So we want kids to be able to tap out the syllables. So helicopter has 4 parts. That's important, and that's going to be important for JK, SK in early school.
So would you suggest an assessment in that case, or just kind of?
I would suggest an assessment in that case. Yeah, I think so. I mean, there is this, it is true that girls tend to develop language faster than boys, but not that much. So it shouldn't be that big a spread. And when it's a sound error, then that's usually not going to correct itself unless you get a really good JK, SK teacher who has time to sit down and show them how the sounds are made. But with 30 children in a class, that's pretty difficult.
And then I think we're just about done. Before we let you go, are you currently accepting any clients at this time? For those?
We are.
And do they need to be referred, or can they just contact you, your office?
They can just phone the clinic. It depends on your private, if you have private healthcare coverage. I don't think that the military coverage requires a doctor's referral, but I'm not sure.
I have to check on that, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Then, are you doing in person or virtual at the moment?
We do both.
Oh, even better. And then lastly, we talked about the bilingual families before. Do you know of anyone in the area that does speech and language therapy in French?
I've had this question before, and at this point, not really. No.
Okay, so would it be beneficial?
There was somebody in Kingston, but I don't know the status of that situation.
Okay, so if a Francophone family was having some difficulties, is it still beneficial for them to seek therapy if it is in English, or would that just be?
I think it depends on what the issue is. So, I mean, if it's a speech sound error, like articulation, speech sounds, that can get trickier, right? But if it's just language coaching, then it doesn't really change English or French. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
The same strategies apply.
Okay. And we just had one last one. My son just turned 3. He is very delayed in his speech. He has increased his vocabulary a great deal. How do I encourage him to speak more if he refuses to cooperate?
Well, he's more interested in boy things and playing outside. I guess you take the speech to whatever his interest is, right? So if he is one of these ones who loves the playground or whatever, you can do like a scavenger hunt on the playground or whatever, anything that can encourage speech and language, or if he likes animals or dinosaurs, anything where you can add pretend play to what he likes. You have to meet them at their area of interest.
All right, makes sense. I believe, gonna check. I think that is all the questions.
I've got something in the chat here. What is it?
I think that was the one I just.
Yeah, and there's something in the queue. Yeah. Yeah, it's the same one in the Q&A.
All right, well, I think that's all we have. If anyone has any more questions that they think of at a later date, you can email me at any time and I will forward them along, or I'll try to find you the answers. And we will be providing those resources in the coming days, hopefully. If you do need any of them translated to French, that just might take me a little bit longer, but they will be coming. But I think that's all we have. So thank you so much, Mary Ellen, for joining us. It was a pleasure. You gave us lots of very useful information. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody
Enjoy
have
your
a good
evening.
night.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.